What I wanted to do is I wanted to share a couple of techniques that I've learned over the years about entering data into QuickBooks Desktop or QuickBooks Online. And there's a particular software which we'll talk about towards the end that I use to convert data across multiple platforms called 2QBO Convert Pro. So first, what I'll do is I'll discuss, just kind of introduce myself real quick. I'll discuss the difference between working with bank data or credit card data in QuickBooks Online versus QuickBooks Desktop. Just kind of give you a quick Reader's Digest version of the difference. Then we'll talk about downloading these transactions from the bank and the different formats that the bank gives you and whether some of these formats are useful or not. And then we'll talk about when we don't have access to those formats that we need to use bank feeds, and we have PDF statements or maybe even spreadsheets, and how that would work using the software called 2QBO Converter Pro. And if you want to kind of open up a side screen, you never heard of that software before, just go to www.qbo.com, check out the software. We're going to spend the first half hour or so talking about QuickBooks itself, and then we'll jump into talking about the software and some of the nuances behind it and what it can do and what it cannot do and so forth. Anyway, about myself, my name is Hector Garcia. I'm a CPA. I'm a practicing consultant in my accounting firm in Miami, and I'm very busy. It's tax season. I'm sure a lot of you guys are as well. And one of the things that we do a lot during the first quarter of the year is a whole bunch of data entry. And we get data in different formats. We get bank statements, we get credit card statements in paper, we get Excel spreadsheets, we get people give us access to their banks. We use HubDoc, an app, to fetch these things. I mean, there's so many ways we can get that data, so it becomes a little bit overwhelming managing it and figuring out what's the best way to use it. I mean, we do so much data entry, just strictly data entry, that a lot of CPA firms contract us, my staff. I have a bunch of data entry staff to do these data conversions for them so they can take care of the data. We can do all the data conversion on the back end and give them the files ready to go. So we literally, that's kind of like one of the services that we offer. But most of the value in that service is the software that we use. And basically, I'm here to showcase what I know, and I'm actually kind of giving up the kitchen sink with this because I'm kind of explaining to you the process of how we function internally and one of our advantages to it. But I like the software so much that I talked to the software manufacturer. I said, let's put something like this together. And I don't work for them. I'm not an owner of the company or anything, but we do have a relationship in which I help them develop the product, and in exchange, I do get paid to consult with them and improve the product. So I am a third party, but at the same time, I'm deeply involved with them and helping them make the product better. So that will be sort of the second, let's call it the second half of the webinar. So for the first half, let's talk about some of the built-in methods that QuickBooks has for importing data. So in QuickBooks Online, we'll start with QuickBooks Online. So in QuickBooks Online, there is, in the gear box on the top right, there's a button that says import data. And you would think that for the most part, that would do more than what it does. It's not really to import data. The only thing that it really does is allow you to import lists. So a list of customers, list of vendors, list of accounts. So there's a button here for vendors. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that you understand where that is, because when you're entering a massive amounts of data, a lot of times these vendors are not in QuickBooks. So you may have to import this vendor list preemptively before you actually do the data entry. And we'll explain that as we go into the process. I'm going to hit cancel. So that's kind of like the only way to import vendors into QuickBooks Online. Now we're working with QuickBooks Desktop, which looks like this. And let me just go to the home page here real quick. The tool is called Add Edit. So we go to the list menu, we go to Add Edit Multiple Entries, and then we go into vendors. And then in here, you will literally just paste your vendor list. So that's kind of like the first premise that I wanted to set, which is, we need to know how to import our vendor list, or our item list or vendor list, whatever, so we can have that entire list in there before we do bank feeds. So important to know, that's the first step. Second step is understanding the difference between bank feeds and batch enter or importing data. So I'm going to start with, I'm going to start with batch enter data. So if you work with QuickBooks Desktop, Accountant, or QuickBooks Enterprise, you can use the batch enter data to literally copy and paste data from Excel, assuming that I got my bank transactions in Excel and that's the only format that I have it. That tool is available for QuickBooks Enterprise or QuickBooks Desktop Accountant only. If I'm working with any other version, QuickBooks Pro, QuickBooks Premier, or QuickBooks Online, I have to use a third-party tool like Transaction Pro Importer or Z-Access. These tools, they cost, the fixed desktop tool costs $200. The monthly tool that's only for QuickBooks Online is like, I believe it's $15 or $20 a month. That's the only tool that you can use to import transactions. We're talking about bank, credit card into QuickBooks Online, because otherwise the only way to get into QuickBooks Online is with bank feeds, which we're going to talk about. It will be the bulk of the presentation, but I want to make sure it's clear. If you're working with QuickBooks Mac, Pro, or Premier, the only way to import information into QuickBooks without having to, QuickBooks Online, Pro, and Premier, without having to buy third-party software, it would be through bank feeds. Now, there are other tools. The one that I'm going to talk about, 2QBO Convert Pro, which is $300, and ScanWriter, that cross path on what they do. ScanWriter was sort of the original pioneer in this thing, and it could take PDF statements or scan statements and import them into QuickBooks using its own set of rules for categorizing transactions. The problem with ScanWriter, and I love the software and I owned it forever, it's the price. It's just a high upfront cost, and then on top of that, they charge you a monthly cost on whatever active files you're using. So the alternative would be 2QBO Convert Pro that does a lot of the things that ScanWriter does, which is take a PDF statement, or even a CSV file or a scanned bank statement and convert it to an importable format, so then you can put it into QuickBooks using bank feeds. And not these two tools are technically not comparable, and they're not the same tool. One is designed to directly input data into QuickBooks, which requires you to select the account category and stuff within the software, and then 2QBO Convert Pro only takes statements and converts them to a .QBO format, which is what you import into QuickBooks to do bank feeds. So I want to make sure that that's out there and that's clear. Now, if you're not using a third party, if you don't need to use a third party tool because I got the data in Excel already, a CSV file, and all my vendors are clean and the accounts are easy to identify, then you can just use the batch enter tool, which we're not going to display today, but you can search in YouTube. I have several videos on this in my channel. You can use the batch enter tool, and again, if you're working with an accountant or enterprise and the data's in Excel, that's free. You don't have to pay extra. It's actually a great tool to use. However, a method that at the end turns out to be the best all-in-one method is because, number one, it works across both QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online. The functionality is the same, which is called bank feeds. Number two, it's something that you can convert for your client or an end user. If you, let's say, for example, you're an accountant, you can convert it for them, import it, and let them do the categorization. So you can actually use bank feeds as a way for you to, let's say, push the data, and the user at the end is the one that recognizes it or accepts it or matches it, whatever the situation may be. And then there's bank rules, and the bank rules, they automate the data entry quite a bit. In some cases, I can have vendors that change slightly because when the bank brings them in, it brings in a bunch of extra data, text, whatever, and it's not the same vendor database I have in QuickBooks, so it'll prompt me to create a new vendor. It will create a mess, basically. So with bank rules, I can say, look, if the vendor name contains this word, if it contains the word, let's say, American Airlines, I don't care if it says American Airlines Dallas or New York or whatever, as long as it contains those two words, make it all one vendor called American Airlines and reclassify it to travel. Now, the other nice thing about bank rules is it interacts really well with your real-time accounting processes. So for example, if I'm importing my bank data, but I want to match, different than import, but I want to match it with something I already did, like I created the invoice separately and I want to match the deposit with the invoice. Bank feeds works beautifully for that. If I wrote a check 2 months ago and then it clears this month and I want it to match instead of duplicating it or recreating it, bank feeds works really, really well with it. And bank feeds is only for banks and credit cards. And for the most part, with QuickBooks Desktop, you still have to press approve or add for it to push into the register. QuickBooks Online is a little bit different, but you still have to. The user still has to push it. So that's a nice thing, is it doesn't completely overtake the all the processes. Okay, so that's it with the intro. I want to jump into demonstration. But before I do, let me answer some of the questions that I have here. Someone says, I've been waiting for your approach. As an accountant for data entry, I would like to understand what's the best way to approach and offer data entry services. Okay, maybe I'll answer that question as I go. Somebody says, does this software work with the Canadian version? I think it should. I worked with several people that I recommended the software, and it should. So email me and then I'll put you in contact with the right people. The software I was discussing should work with the Canadian version. Can you import the chart of accounts in QuickBooks Desktop? So the answer is yes. However, it's beyond the scope of this webinar. So Lucinda, yes, you can do that, but not going to cover it. Some of the credit cards only offer PDF statements. They don't offer CSV or QBO files, and in some cases, quicken downloads. How can I import these? So you're gonna need the software to convert them, Cheryl. So you're gonna need the software. Okay, so let's do the demonstration. So let's open up QuickBooks Online first, and I'm on the banking page of QuickBooks Online, and basically what I did is I went into Chase, and I'll just kind of show you what I did. So I went into my Chase bank account, and this is literally what I did. This is not sample file, the test file. So I went into my Chase bank account. I went into my credit card, clicked on See Activity, and went to somewhere a button that says download activity, and it gave me a couple of choices. So it says, how do you want to download this? You want to download it in Quicken format, you want to download it in QuickBooks IIF format, Web Connect format, CSV. So Chase is awesome because it gives you tons of different formats. And regarding what bank you're working with, I would say, and I'm going to just show you a different screen similar to this that also shows me all the formats. But I'm saying, regardless of what bank you have, if you have access to downloading the QBO file, this is the best approach you can do. Forget about anything else, conversion software, forget it. Best thing you can do is download the QBO file from your bank. Now, the caveat is a lot of banks don't offer it past 90 days, 180 days. That's a big issue. Another caveat is some banks just bring in garbage, like the data that's on that spreadsheet or that QBO, it's garbage. Like there's vendors are cut off, information is missing, and you may have to edit it. You may have to literally change it, and before you bring it back into QuickBooks. So that's a kind of a challenge. And in some banks just offer either the Quicken file or the CSV file, which in those two cases, because you can't import it through bank feeds without it being a QBO file, you are going to need a third-party software for that. So just kind of wanted to clarify that, and every bank is different. So I really, can't show you how it looks like in every bank. But when you work with the major banks, typically it's not an issue. So what I did afterwards is I clicked on File Upload. I clicked on that button that says File Upload. I went and looked for my QBO file that I downloaded from the bank. So I searched it somewhere in my computer, wherever I saved it, hit open, and then hit next, and then I'll kind of go through the motions to check and double check which account is it related to, and then you press next and you bring them in. So after you bring them in, they come into this screen. This is called the bank feeds screen, and the bank feed screen is designed for it to be sort of a purgatory between the data that came through the bank and what you're going to actually put into QuickBooks. Now, one of the really important things that is confusing to most users is QuickBooks is trying to make data entry easy for the layman. And when I say layman, I'm talking about, let's say, the non-accountants. So what they do is they will they will change they would change the name to make it, let's say, cleaner. The problem is that sometimes it can make major mistakes in understanding, the interpretation of that name. So I'm going to click on that little gear button on the top right, and I'm going to click on Show Bank Details, just to show you that you can toggle between how the data actually came through the bank. So the bank actually says Marathon Petro and Pizza Hut 0123 whatever, right? But then if I don't have this checkbox, the one called Show Bank Details, so if I don't have this checkbox here, what happens is QuickBooks will make it may potentially change it, clean it, but in some cases it's wrong. So you may want to switch back and forth or only work with bank details in order to just make sure that wrong data doesn't come in. So I'm going to start on the payee side, and then I'm going to click on the first transaction, and then I'm just going to literally put my vendor's name in there. So one of the fastest way to do this is to literally copy from the memo and paste into the payee name. And then literally right after you paste, you hit tab. It will, or sorry, after you hit paste, you click on Add Marathon Petro, and then you click on Save, and it'll create the vendor. This is typically the most annoying part of the whole process. So then QuickBooks suggests a category for you, and you got to be careful. Again, if you're not an accountant and you're not thinking about these things, you may just causing total destruction. Now, Marathon is a gas station, so could that be travel? Yes. Could that be automobile expense? Also, yes. So you have to actually do the categorization on the fly. If your account is not in your account category in your chart of accounts, you have to create it. But for the most part, you should have it, and then you click on Add. Now, once you click on Add, what happens next is really, really important because there's some artificial intelligence going on the QuickBooks side where it's going to try to go comb your entire download and try to figure out what other transactions were similar. So I'm going to click on Recognized here in the top, and notice that there was another one with the exact same naming convention, and therefore it makes total sense that it suggests you to put the same thing on it. You still have to click on Add and accept it for it to push through. Now I want to compare this against the process in QuickBooks Desktop. So, and we're starting a little bit slow, and we're going to move into more advanced topics as we go, because I know we have a couple of accountants here. So far, just for the heck of it, on the questions box, can you put there yes if you have learned something new so far, or no if everything else you knew already? So just put yes if you learned something new, and no if so far you don't know everything. And that'll let me know whether I should pick up the pace or not. Okay, so yeah, we got kind of a mixed crowd here. Okay, all right, good. So let me go into bank feeds and go to Bank Feed Center. And I'm going to click on Transaction List, and I'm going to show you the exact same concept. Now, this screen, it's actually not as friendly as the QuickBooks Online version, and it's a little bit clunky. However, if you have some patience, it'll work pretty much similar to it. For example, there's Marathon Petro, and what I like about this is QuickBooks Desktop does not clean the payees for you, so you always get the raw data from the bank. Now you're only going to get a certain number of characters, and the other side of the characters are going to be coming into this area called Show Bank Memo. So if your bank separates it into two areas, the memo and the payee, you would see them split in there. But it's possible that if, for example, Chase doesn't split them, it puts whatever it can fit into one column, and that's it. So that's kind of the limitation behind that. So in some cases you see data there, in some cases you don't. So for this, I'm going to come in here and create my vendor. So I'm going to type Marathon Petro, or let's just say Marathon, hit tab, and then I'm going to click quick add, and then OK. I wish there was a shortcut for that, but there isn't. So you kind of have to click quick add OK, create that vendor. Then when the account shows up, I'm going to put there automobile expenses. And then here in the drop down, I'm going to click on Quick Add, and that's going to ask me, do you want me to create a rule that the next time that I see marathon expense, that I automatically classify it? So if I exclude it, if I say ignore the rule, okay? If I exclude the rule, if I don't create the rule, okay? Next time marathon comes up, I have to do the same categorization manually. In contrast, with QuickBooks Online, it didn't ask me whether or not, where's my QuickBooks Online? It didn't ask me whether or not it wanted the rule. It actually did it for me automatically. Let me do something else. Um, Let me do something else instead. Let me find which other one repeats itself. Let's say 7-Eleven. Notice I'm going to go Payee. I'm going to type, I'm going to copy and paste the Payee from here, add, save, and then I'm going to put this into automobile expense and then click on add. And it didn't ask me. It did not ask me. And also, it didn't create the rule. In QuickBooks Online, there's no rules being created automatically. But there is this, let's call it memory, that lingers on, that lingers in, and then anytime that it thinks you should do something, it will put it in green for you like this, letting you know that it recognized it based on past history, based on past behavior. Now, this is not a rule, which means that I cannot modify it. So I'm at the mercy of whatever QuickBooks thought was the right thing to do. And that's where some of the trouble can happen. Let me go ahead and notice that there's 4 transactions there. So I'm going to click on add them all. Now let me go into a QuickBooks Desktop and kind of contrast it here. Let me look for a 7-Eleven vendor, and there it is, 7-Eleven. And notice that there's 4 7-Elevens there, but 2 have one name and 2 have the other name. QuickBooks Online recognized all 4 of them using its own artificial intelligence, as I mentioned, but you're going to see that unless I specifically modify the rule, when I do it with QuickBooks Desktop, it's only going to recognize the 2 that are exact. They have to be exact to the letter. So I'm going to accept the first one. It's going to ask me if it wants to do the rule, and then obviously I'm going to say okay. And then we're going to notice on the top right side how 2 transactions were recognized and changed. And notice that my 7-Eleven was now recognized and is still asking for my approval. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on batch actions and add approve, and that's going to bring them into my register. Now when I go back into my transactions to review, and I'm going to click on download it as one more time, the other 7-Elevens were not recognized. Why? Because in QuickBooks Desktop, the rules have to be explicit and they have to be exact. With QuickBooks Online, they're loose. And the problem with loose rules is that we really don't know how this behaves, so we have to be very careful about that behavior. Now, when I go to rules on the top right, I can actually come to this rule, and I can right click and edit, and I can edit the rule, and I can tell it, look, if it contains the word 7-Eleven plus those numbers, and obviously I don't need those numbers, and if it contains just the word 7-Eleven, ignore the numbers, then automatically change it to 7-Eleven automobile expense, and I'll click on save, and at that point I can close that, and then we can see that the other 2 got recognized. Look in the top right where it says that the other 2 got recognized because we actually explicitly changed that rule. So in QuickBooks Desktop, we get to create rules as well, but there's also sort of behind the scene rules, or something that I called implicit rules, which is the stuff that QuickBooks guesses based on your behaviors. You want to be very careful about recognizing the difference between explicit rules and implicit rules. So let's talk about creating an explicit rule in QuickBooks Online. So for example, I'm going to create an implicit rule for Amazon Marketplace, right? So I'm going to come in here on the top, I'm going to click on Manage Rules, and then I'm going to go to New Rule, so top right, New Rule, and then I'm going to call this Amazon, and I'm going to say, if the bank text contains the word Amazon, and I'm going to put here Marketplace, change the category to a category called Amazon Marketplace, and I'm creating the vendor on the fly here, and put that into office supplies. Okay, and then I'll click on save, and that will create my Amazon bank rules. So there's the rules. Things haven't been categorized automatically. They're just the rules. And now we're going to see them. They should be under categorized. Maybe I misspelled something on the rule itself. Let me check real quick. Let me go back into my rules here and go to Amazon. And it's possible that marketplace is spelled a little bit different. So I'm going to take out the word marketplace, and it's kind of a good illustration of what happens if something's different. So maybe marketplace was shortened or something like that. So I'm going to change the rule so it just says Amazon, and then it should recognize a whole bunch of transactions. Let me get out of it and come back in so it refreshes. That's curious. Let's do it in a different way. Let's see. I wonder if I'm doing something wrong. Let me try a different one. Let me try Walmart. So we'll try Walmart. I'm going to copy the actual vendor's name here, make sure I'm not missing a beat here. And I'm going to go in the top right, click on Manage Rules, New Rule, room name Walmart. If the bank text contains Walmart, the payee name is Walmart. Go to Add, and that's office supplies. So I'm being kind of consistent across the board here. And then click on Save. And let me just make sure that, yeah, it's all set up. Okay, that should be fine. And there you go, recognize, and there's my Walmart. So the difference is with this one, you see the word rule in it. Rule means that it's following your explicit instructions. Okay, it's following your implicit instructions, and it's following a rule that I wrote down. Different than when it more or less finds things on its own. Let me use another example, and I'm going to go back into in QuickBooks here, and I'm going to search for something called Publix. So there's a vendor in Florida for supermarkets called Publix, Publix. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search through my entire list of transactions. So I'm going to select 300 rows. That way I get a little bit more information in there. And then I'm going to hope that Publix is there, but I can use any of them that repeat. So I'm just looking for a few that repeat so we can make it. Let's do iTunes. That works just fine. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to do the rule in a different way. I'm going to type iTunes here. So I'm basically just entering the transaction. Again, I am not creating the rule for it. I'm going to click on Add. And then QuickBooks recognized 35 of them. Again, it doesn't say the word rule because there isn't an explicit rule, and it's telling you should do this. Okay, so that's a really important thing. So let's say, for example, I'm going to take the same transaction and change the category. And the minute I change the category, notice that something new happens here, letting me know that maybe I'm not 100% sure what you want to do with this. So I can actually tell it, what do I want these rules to be? So remember, the first time I created it, QuickBooks Online kind of did whatever it wanted to do. The second time around, before I'm clicking on Add, I'm reading this, and I'm going to click on Edit the setting. And then I can actually override it to say, you know what? Don't create a rule for this. So if I hit the checkbox, it won't create a rule for it. So that's pretty cool. That's very interesting. So when I click on Save, it won't create a rule for it. And notice it sends it all back to uncategorized. You see that? So that's all back to uncategorized. It's not trying to do something with it anymore. It all sends it back to uncategorized. Okay, so that's something that we purposely told it that we don't want this to stay in your memory. So basically, there's literally a rule that says leave iTunes uncategorized. Now, let's say I categorize it this time around. I give it a category. It'll prompt me again. Okay, what do you want to do with this? And then I can click on Edit this setting. Okay, that little button that's there. And these things are really subtle there, so you kind of have to explore. And I can click on Create Custom Rule. And then what I will do is it will prompt QuickBooks to go the custom rule, which will take me straight into that screen without having me to click in so many places. And then under a rule name, I can call this iTunes, and then have an actual explicit rule, and then click on Save. And then now it will now recognize them, or it should recognize them. Let me hit refresh here. It should recognize them and send them all in there. Now, some of the text in there has to be, has to be exact. So as long as all the vendors have the exact text, which I would have to double check if it is, it will show up in there and then make an explicit rule. Now, so that's just heavy contrast with the way it works with QuickBooks Desktop and the way it works with QuickBooks Online. QuickBooks Desktop has powerful rules. You can create them from scratch. Like in the case of Google, for example, I can just click on rules, and then I can create a new rule from scratch and call this Pizza Hut, and then tell it if it's called, if the word Pizza Hut is on the bank description, then we're going to create a new payee called Pizza Hut. Okay, quick add vendor. Okay, and then add the subsequent rule, which is also put it under meals and entertainment. Now the problem is this screen is a little bit cookie on the way it works. You can't resize stuff, so you kind of have to deal with how it is. But you can create your own rules explicitly in QuickBooks Desktop, and then you're going to see that it will automatically do it for you. Now it won't tell you, whether it's a rule implicit or explicit. It's just because there's just one dimension of rules in QuickBooks Desktop. So that's in a nutshell the limits of QuickBooks Desktop and the contrast with how it works with QuickBooks Online. Now, I personally like the way it works with QuickBooks Online better, just because. And let me go back to the rules here real quick, just so we can. I'm gonna get rid of my uncategorized iTunes one, and I'm gonna leave just my one iTunes I had in there, and go back to banking, so it should recognize them now. So that's the difference between the power of the desktop and online. With the bank rules, with online, it will suggest some of the stuff for you. And on top of that, it'll give you the ability to stop it and the ability to create an explicit rule and edit it. But the best part, in my opinion, is being able to export my rules and import them into another QuickBooks file. So if you're working with one client or one QuickBooks file that has really good rules list, it's really sophisticated, it pretty much covers 90% of the work, you can export the rules, and it'll kind of walk you through the process. It'll create a special Excel file, and then you open up the other QuickBooks file and you click on import rules, and basically you select the same file you exported from that one QuickBooks file, bring it in here. It's going to ask you to double check the mapping, just because not always for obvious reasons, the chart of accounts on one QuickBooks file the chart of accounts and the vendor list may not be the same. So once you import the rules, it's going to ask you, hey, can we map the vendors so they align? Can we map the categories so they align? And you go to that process and then click import. And then basically your new QuickBooks Online file will have the rules from the other one. So I do suggest that you export the vendor list, export the chart of accounts from your old file that contains all the good data, import it into the new one before you import the rules. So that's kind of the process. You definitely want to do that first. Okay. All right. So that's kind of like the bank feeds power in a nutshell. I know I must be missing something important, but that's as much as I wanted to cover with that. So there's also a way to import a CSV file straight to QuickBooks Online, not available in QuickBooks Desktop, but you can go to File Upload and you can go to Browse and you can select a CSV file. So I'm going to grab a CSV file, and let's say that I downloaded an Excel or CSV file. I'm looking for the one that I have here. Where did I put it? I think it's in my desktop somewhere. There it is. So I got a CSV file, and let's assume that this CSV file is from my bank. Now, there's a problem with importing CSV files, and this is as of today. Today is January 18, 2017. As of today, the CSV functionality does not allow, let me create a new bank account here, does not allow for importing memo, okay? It also does not allow for importing check numbers, a reference number. So the problem is that I can only work with a date field, a description field, and an amount. So if I wanted to bring in a check number or a memo, two really important, powerful things from an import, I can't do it. So yes, I can import a CSV file, and it will work great for a credit card because you got 3 lines basically. You got date, amount, and payee or bank description, but it won't work for reference number, which is useful for check numbers, and a memo if you want to bring that in. So as of now, QuickBooks Online does have limited CSV import capabilities into bank feeds, but it's not as complete. So let's talk about the cases in which the only available options I had from the bank was a CSV file or a PDF file, and I want to use my full functionality for bank feeds to import my bank transactions. So let me pull up the CSV file real quick. Where did I put it? There it is. So let's say this is what I downloaded from the bank. Okay. So as I mentioned, if you're working with QuickBooks Desktop, you're not going to be able to import this data through bank feeds. You're going to be able to convert it. You're going to have to convert it into a .qbo file. But one of the things that I recommend if you download a spreadsheet like this from the bank because you couldn't download the QBO file, you may want to clean it up first, right? Because you take advantage that you have the raw Excel data, clean it up before you bring it into QuickBooks. Because if you clean it up, then you can really speed up your process. So anyway, let's pretend that this is bank information. This is information from the bank. So I'm going to go ahead and start cleaning this up here and only have one transaction date, one description, one amount. I'm going to come in and create a column for memo, and then I'm going to copy and paste my original bank information into a memo field, or I can concatenate it in the case where I already have two. And the reason for that is because QuickBooks Online will maintain the original text information, but QuickBooks Desktop will not. So the closest thing you have to maintaining your original bank memo in QuickBooks Desktop is to duplicate that one column. And then once we did that part, we're going to go ahead and through several, let's say, particular Excel activities, we're going to clean these up manually in Excel because we can do them quite quickly, and it would be much faster than establishing bank feeds. So I go down the line and I look for some of the vendors that have duplicates, but maybe possibly have different names. This is a good example, right? The bank brings in all this extra information, so I'm going to change it to American Air or American Airlines, and then drag it down. And then, for example, these are all the same exact vendor, and I can keep scrolling down and then seeing instances in which the vendors are the same, but there's only a few numbers that change. And when those opportunities come in, Barnes & Noble is a great example. When those opportunities come in, I'm going to click and drag it down to do those. And if we're entering, let's say, 12 months worth of information, a year's worth of information, typically this process goes pretty smooth because a lot of people tend to use the same vendor over and over and over, or the same type of vendor over and over, and the data duplicates like this. So once I'm finished doing this entire cleanup process, as I mentioned, that is what I suggest first. If you can download the data in Excel, once I do this entire cleanup process, then what I do is I copy that vendor list. I hit copy, and if I'm working with QuickBooks Desktop, I'm going to go to list menu, add edit multiple list entries, which I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. I'm going to click on vendors, and then I'm going to paste them in there. And the reason for that is because I don't want to sit there and create vendors every single time. So then I click save changes, and again, caveat, you clean them up in Excel first. Don't create thousands of vendors in your QuickBooks file and create this disaster for no reason. Clean them up in Excel first, and you may need to resort to several quick Excel skills for this. And I have a webinar on Excel in a couple of weeks, so you can join that if you want to talk about strictly about cleaning up data in Excel. Nothing to do with QuickBooks. It's just an Excel webinar that I have. I'll post a link in the chat below. So I bring in just the vendor names again to prevent my we said to prevent the having to create all these vendors on the fly. And then what's the value of doing that? Well, the value is, as I'm doing my data entry, and as I mentioned to you, the most annoying part is kind of creating the vendor on the fly. As I'm doing my data entry after I import my vendor list, I should just be able to type, for example, a Google in there, and it will pull up from my it's thinking for some reason. but it should be able to do it from there and pull it up, and I don't have to create it on the fly. Let me just show you what that process looks like in QuickBooks Online real quick. So switch over to QuickBooks Online. So the way you would do that before is you would go to the gear menu, click on import data, and then you would click on vendors, select your spreadsheet, and then you would select the column that contains the vendor name, which in this case it would be Payee or something like that, whatever it is called in my Excel file. So this is called, let's see, this is called description. So let me save this, finish saving it so I can finish importing it into QuickBooks Online. Okay, and I'll import it again now that it's updated. And again, I'm just importing. I don't know why this is acting up, but I'm just importing my list of vendors. I would basically select my vendor name in there and then click on next, and then my entire vendor list should show up. I don't know why it's acting up. Maybe I'm going to change this real quick to the word name. I think it'll make it a little bit easier. So let me open up my spreadsheet, and I'm gonna change the name of the column. I don't know why my computer is acting up today. Apologize for that. So I'm gonna put here a name. Okay, I'm gonna save that, and that should allow me to import it quite easily into QuickBooks Online. But again, the point is that I don't have to type and create all those vendors on the fly. So that's kind of what the process is. That's just a quick tip. You may want to change the title for it to read it correctly. So after I import my vendor list, because I did have the data in Excel, now I don't have to create all these vendors every time I do it. Now, so let's talk about a circumstance, a completely different circumstance in which I don't have the data in Excel, and I don't have the data in the QBO format. I'm going to run a special software called 2QBO Convert Pro. And I'm waiting for my computer to kind of react. I don't know what's wrong with it. Give me 1 second. Okay, there it is. Okay, so there's my software. It's called 2QBO Convert Pro. And what this software will allow me to do is it can read a PDF bank statement, or it can even read a CSV bank statement that I edited. So in some cases, I want to clean my bank statement, edit it, and then re-import it, cleaned up in QuickBooks Online. So I run this software, and then I click on the settings button, and I tell it, what am I trying to convert? So I can say, look, I'm trying to convert a credit card statement. And then on the lookup, it says, well, what bank is it? And you select the bank, and there's a whole bunch of banks in here. Now, if your bank is not listed here, it doesn't matter. You can pick any bank. That's actually completely irrelevant, honestly. But you want to pick the bank that you have in order for it not to be confusing. And then you put the account number. That's important to put the account number because if you import multiple bank statements, you want at least QuickBooks to recognize which one is it was looking at. Okay, so then basically I go through this initial setup, and it's got a couple of interesting things, like if I'm using Euro format, do I want it to read Euro format dates? Are the charges positive and the deposits negative, that sort of thing. That way you don't have to change it on the spreadsheet. You can actually, if you import a QIF file, which is the only option that that PayPal gives you for kind of QuickBooks, you can separate the PayPal fee from the original transaction using this tool, which is actually really, really good. And there's a couple of little things here and there, but we don't need to get too deeply. And then I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to click on Convert. So when I click on Convert, I'm going to go search in my desktop for my bank statement. So I'm going to have bank statements of different formats. And I'm going to, before I convert it, let me just open it real quick just to show you what I have. So I got bank statement number 1, and this is my credit card statement that I was able to download digitally from the bank. And sometimes the banks provide these statements and don't provide the digital downloads. Sometimes they provide the statements for 2 years worth, but only do digital downloads for 6 months worth. So you may want to convert it just for the first 6 months, that sort of thing. Sometimes the person closed the bank account and all they have is this, and there's just no physical way to bring to bring that into QuickBooks digitally. So I have to use a bank statement. So or maybe the bank doesn't even support online banking on exports. I mean, who knows? But either way, if for whatever reason the only thing you have is the bank statement and it's something that was digitally downloaded, the way you know is because you can select the text easily, right? So if you actually move your mouse around and you see that it can recognize letter by letter, that means it's digital. That means it wasn't scanned. So this actually, the conversion process is super smooth. So I literally click on convert, pick my statement, and then I click on preview. And I always like to click on preview just to kind of understand what is it that the software is doing before doing the conversion. And the software, literally like black magic, it took that statement in PDF, it got rid of everything you didn't need, and it organized it into a spreadsheet format for you. Now, why do you want it in a spreadsheet format? Two reasons. One, I can verify, I can look at it, I can make changes to it if I want to adjust some of these information on the fly. I can do it all before I import it into QuickBooks. Or I can export it into a CSV and exactly as I mentioned, manipulate it, change it, clean it in QuickBooks, and then bring it back and convert it into a QBO format. Or I can just go straight into a QBO format, and then I can click here where it says create QBO. Now, one really important tip, when you bring this information in and you're working with QuickBooks Desktop, you want the original payee name to copy over to the memo. I mean, the QuickBooks Online does this really well, but QuickBooks Desktop does not. So the only way to get QuickBooks Desktop to have the original name on the memo side after I do bank feeds, and this is a little feature that we added, or that I convinced Ralph from 2QBO to add it, which is you basically select Payee plus Memo here, and then you click here and you put Memo Add-in, and this combination, Payee from Memo, Payee and Memo IN, will concatenate it. So we'll bring in Payment Thank You and Quick Bookkeeping Training, whatever that is. It'll bring it all combined into the memo field, combined. And that way, if I lose my original payee name, it's still in the memo, which is extremely powerful. And it's a solution that worked really well with QuickBooks Online, but with QuickBooks Desktop, this is the only way around it. So then on the top right, I just want to make sure that my beginning balances match, my ending balances match. So this is a pre-reconciliation, has nothing to do with reconciling inside QuickBooks. This is a pre-reconciliation just to make sure that the software is not missing anything. Now, the single most powerful feature, which I love, I mean, it's just awesome, is called the Payee Cleanup Settings. It's actually one of the newest things that they added in the past, I would say about past 6 months or 7 months. And if you already bought this software 6, 7 months ago, you can just download the update and you will have this update. So anyway, so what's really nice about this is there's a couple of things here. For example, if I want to get rid of the phone number, you see right here where it says WebEx and there's a phone number. If I click on remove phone numbers, so I want you to focus on WebEx and the phone number. Focus on that, and I'm going to click on this checkbox. You're going to see that phone number goes away. So that cleans up the process a little bit more for me. Then it says remove two-letter state abbreviation. So it will recognize if there are two letters, both in caps, and they're next to each other, it will recognize it and remove that. And there's a couple of things here, like for example, remove everything after a special character. Like if I wanted to remove a plus sign, a star, a quote, a parentheses, you can play with all these. These are definitely worth playing with. And then there's wildcards, so you can play with your cleanup process, and you can pretty much figure out based on each bank which is going to be the best way to go about it. Some credit cards add the word USD next to it or something like that, or some Amex will add the currency, the international currency value on it. So if you want to just get rid of information that's there, you can use the Payee cleanup settings and clean it up preemptively before bringing it to QuickBooks on QuickBooks Desktop or QuickBooks Online. So then I go to create a QBO file, and then it'll create a .qbo file on the same folder where my PDF file is, and it should be here somewhere. There it is. There's my QBO file. And just for the sake of exercise, let me show you what a QBO file looks inside of Excel, just so you can kind of see why the QBO file, it's something that you really can't create on your own. You really can't create on your own, go from Excel to QBO. is because it uses a special format. I'm just going to open it in the spreadsheet here. Let me go to File. Oh, there it is. Okay, so this is what the QBO file looks on the inside. See, it's a bunch of stuff, right? That's something you're not going to be able to manually recreate. You need converter software to do that. So that's why we use converter software, again, to go from CSV to QBO or Excel to QBO or PDF to QBO. So all those things. And again, QBO is the format, not necessarily QuickBooks Online. So then I can import this information. So I'm going to go open up QuickBooks Online, and I can go to File Upload, top right, and I can select my file. So I'm going to select my new QBO file that I created, and then I'm going to click on OK or Open. And I'm going to click on Next, and that's going to bring that in. So I'm going to bring that in. I'm going to bring it in as another account. So I'm going to just create a second account here. I'm going to call it, assume it's an Amex. I'm just going to call this Amex for a second, and then go save and close. And then I'm going to hit Next, and then it's going to bring all that information in there. And upload it through bank feeds. So then I can use all the features that I discussed through bank feeds. So that's why we spend a long time discussing bank feeds at first, so you understand the value on bringing that information through bank feeds and not in any other way. Because I know some people like to import using batch enter, or they like using third-party importing tools like Transaction Pro Importer or something like that. So I just trying to sell you on the value of using bank feeds. And if you have an Excel file, CSV file, whatever, you can convert it to QBO using that one tool. So as you go to the process, you click Let's Go. You go back into bank feeds, and you're going to see that same information we were looking at just now, but we're going to see it in this case, we're going to see it cleaned up. But in the case of maybe something we hadn't worked with before, then all the bank rules apply accordingly if the bank rules are set to be universal and that sort of thing. And it's the same process for QuickBooks Desktop. I'll make sure we don't forget about my beloved QuickBooks Desktop. So if I go to open up QuickBooks Desktop, which I think it just literally froze on me, so I'm going to open another session here. But if I go to QuickBooks Desktop and I import, if I import the QBO file, it works just the same. One area where people get a little bit confused about, they're like, oh, this QBO file is only working QuickBooks Online, and it has nothing to do with QuickBooks Online. You can import manual QBO files into QuickBooks Desktop. Just because it's called QBO, it just causes some confusion. So again, you can use QBO files to import in desktop or online. And I think Xero too. I don't want to get too much into it because I don't use that other accounting software. But QuickBooks Desktop, QuickBooks Online, they can both take advantage of this tool regardless on the context that you are working in. Let me see. All right, so last 5 minutes, Q&A. I'd like to answer all the questions that you have. So I'm going to go through it, and please, so it says, oh, show the upload through desktop. Okay, I thought I did that. Go to the File menu, go to Utilities, Import Web Connect, and you select it. Let's see what else we got. If you have an Excel file with petty cash transactions, could I upload my petty cash activity into QuickBooks Online or QuickBooks Desktop? The answer is yes, of course. If you have an Excel file and you got date, amount, payee, you can just convert it to a QBO file, full QuickBooks into thinking it's doing bank feeds, and you can literally import huge Excel files that contain petty cash transactions into QuickBooks Desktop or Online and use the bank feeds functionality to import those. What's the website again? Okay, that's www.2qbo.com. www.2qbo.com. Let me see what other questions we have. Does it work with bank statements from all over the world? Okay, so I would say, look, you can contact support and send them your statements, and they can tell you whether or not. I mean, I would say in some cases yes, in some cases no. I had one statement in Hong Kong that had some Chinese characters in it, or Mandarin characters, whatever it is, and I had to I sent it to them, and then they worked it out and made it work for me. But I don't know if this is going to be sort of a sustainable thing. So I would say if U.S. and Canada should work flawless. Anything else, I would say it would probably have caveats associated with it. Um, why would you use this tool instead of importing directly to with using a Transaction Pro importer or a third-party importing tool if you already have the data in Excel? So the answer is with bank feeds, I can use bank rules and I can classify things using those tools. And with any importing software, I have to specify the account name. So it doesn't speed up the process. And remember, it's the renaming rules what makes it different and significant. Somebody says, I have the CSV to QBO tool and I like to upgrade to the PDF tool. Can I just pay the price difference and do that? So the answer is yes, but you're going to have to contact them. Definitely have to contact them because I really don't know what the process is to upgrade. But if you only have the Excel tool and you want the statement tools, you have to upgrade. Somebody says, how does it convert scanned bank statements? So yeah, it uses something called OCR, which is optical character recognition. So it basically reads the statement and uses that technology to try to figure out what is what. And if it's digital PDF, it's going to be 1,000 times better. If it's scanned, it's going to be subject to all sorts of glitches, especially if your paper's marked. If you got markings or lines or creases, all that stuff plays into it. All right, so for the last thing, just type in the questions box. If you learned something new, just put yes. If you didn't, let me know. At least I know that at least some of you knew everything that I mentioned. And again, strongly recommend that you purchase the software. Go to www.2qbo.com. They don't state a return policy because they don't have a return policy. But I basically told a developer that if I'm gonna, do a webinar like this, that I want people to have confidence. So if you buy it and you have an issue with it and you return it within 14 days, no questions asked. Email them, mention the webinar, and they will give you your money back. No discounts. No discounts. So I had two choices. I either get a little bit of a discount or a return policy, and he gave me return policy, and I say fine, because that way you can test it, try it, and no questions asked. And I can't personally guarantee because I don't work with this company, but I'm telling you, you won't have any issues if you buy it, test it. If it doesn't work, contact support. They'll help you. Otherwise, you can get return. You can get 100% money back guaranteed. Anyway, so we're gonna set this up. We're gonna set up this webinar as a series, and we'll run it each month. And each month we'll cover some of the same concepts, but then I'll try to add some new things each month, and you will get invitations for that automatically. And if new features get added, we'll discuss more deeper new features. That's it for me. If you don't have any more questions, if you want to contact me directly, people always ask for my email. It's hector@garciacpa.com. If you want to contact me directly for whatever reason. Otherwise, have a tax season. Have a nice tax season. Have a nice day. And hopefully you learn something new. Have a good day. Bye.